Okay, so in our last class, we spoke about what we like to call the separation of consents, and we said it is a golden rule. So essentially, what that means is that we write our HTML in one file, write our CSS in another file, and we write our JavaScript in a different file. So we like to separate those things. We don't like to put them together. And then also we use HTML to handle our content. We use CSS for our styling. We use JavaScript for our behavior and interactions. And just to go a little bit, just to recap a little bit about HTML, we're talking about HTML. We said HTML is for our content, it's for our markup. And we're talking about elements, we're talking about attributes, we're talking about tags. Today, we just want to go a little further and want to talk about CSS. And essentially, all what CSS is for styling. So just as HTML is for our content, CSS is for styling up our content. Now, for most of the code we've written so far in this class, we'll see that it counts plain. It's just a white background and there's a black text. And if you go on most sites, it's not always the same. You don't always see white background with black text. You see different things. You see different colors. Now CSS is the way we do that. And CSS just stands for cascading style sheets. I mean, as we go on, we'll talk about what cascading is. And so CSS is just our styling sheet, and it is for specifying how our documents are presented. So that is our appearance, our layout, etc. The other thing to note is that CSS is a rule-based language. So all what that means is that there are rules that we follow when we're writing our CSS. So we'll learn some of those rules as we go on today. And then in our next class, we'll try and learn more rules. So the only thing to note is that CSS is for styling. It's a cascading style sheet. And then it is for specifying how our documents are presented. Okay. So in most of our code, we usually only had to do HTML. So the way we link our CSS, today will be the first time we are doing CSS, but the way we link our CSS is in our head tag, we put a link and we do a relative style sheet and we do an href of style sheet.css. I mean, it's fine if it doesn't make sense. When we write the code, you'll see how to implement it. But the only thing to note is that there are two ways. I mean, there are two ways that you can do CSS. You can write CSS in your HTML. It's called inline styles, but it's usually not recommended because then it becomes hard to maintain. So the more code you write, it becomes so much that sometimes it can become very hard to maintain. So we like to separate, like we say in our separation of consents, we like to separate our style sheet from our HTML. So the way we link it is in our head. Currently, the only thing we've been doing in our head is we've been putting a title. But then from now onwards, we'll be adding an additional thing, which is a link to our style sheet. And don't worry about it right now, but as we get there, we will talk more about it. Okay, so let's learn some CSS syntax now. Before we go on, does anybody have any question so far about what we've discussed? You can just throw it in the chat or you can come off mute. Does anybody have any questions about what CSS is? Okay, great. So the way we write CSS is always the same. So there's a syntax for CSS. Now, the first thing is you always have the selector. So the selector is which elements in your HTML you are targeting to style. So you have the selector, the name of the selector. So it could be a paragraph, it could be a span. If you have a class, you can use the name of the class. So you have the selector, then you open a curly braces or a curly bracket, then you write what attributes you are looking for. So you have the property and you have the value. So you can have maybe a color as the property and the value can be red, or you can have the text align. You can have center. I mean, we'll learn a few properties today. But then just to get used to the syntax, so you have the selector. The selector is for which element you are looking to target. Then you open the curly braces and you write your property inside. So this is essentially your CSS syntax. Or in some instances, you see them call it the CSS rule. So it's always the same. You have, and the one thing to note is that all your property and values end with a semicolon. If you don't end it with a semicolon, most times it will throw an error. So it'll remind you to add your semicolon. But then it's always the same. So you have the property, you have the value, the property, the value, and you end it with a semicolon. Okay. So there are few examples of selectors. There are few ways you can target. And when we talk about selectors, we're essentially selectors are used to find the HTML element you want to style. So like we've been writing HTML, there are so many HTML elements that we write. We've been writing paragraphs, we've been writing spans, we've been writing headers, we've been writing a lot of things. But then to actually style it, we need to point to it. So selectors are the way we point to our HTML elements that this is the particular element that I want to style. So there are a few ways you can do that. One way is to obviously use the element selector. So for example, if I wanted to style my paragraphs, I would just tag all my paragraphs. And don't worry, if you can picture it right now, we'll write code to see how it looks. But then you can use the element selector. So if I wanted to style my paragraph, I would use a P. If I wanted to style my H1, I'll use my H1. So it's still the same elements we know, but then we can bring that into CSS to style our content. Another way is to use class selectors. So class selectors, the last time we spoke about attributes and we said we can add classes to our HTML. So classes are ways of giving them additional information. So when we give those additional information, we can in turn use those classes to style our elements. So for example, if I have 5 paragraphs and I wanted to style one of the paragraphs differently, I mean, if I'm using the element selector, it will just give all my paragraphs the same styling that I'm giving it. But if I wanted one paragraph to be peculiar, I could give that paragraph a class. So maybe different. I can call the class different. Then in my CSS, I will target different. I mean, you see how to write it. Then I'll give that a different style. So you can also use classes to style your elements. So most times, if you would use the element selector if you want a lot of things. For example, if I want all my paragraphs to look a certain way, I'll just use the element tag or I'll use the paragraph element to select that and then style it. But then if I have one paragraph that I want to look different, one way I could do it is to give that paragraph a class. Then when I'm styling it, I'll use that class name to style it differently. Does that make sense, please? If it makes sense, give me a thumbs up so that I know that we're free to move on. Okay. Thank you, George. By the way, is there any background noise? Let me know. If there's no background noise, you can give me a thumbs down. If there's a background noise, give me a thumbs up. I just want to be sure. There's background noise. Is it very loud? I'll appreciate if someone came off mute because I can't hear myself. So if someone came off mute, so let me know. Okay, give me 1 second.
I'm sorry, I don't know if you're speaking, but if you're speaking, we can't hear anything.
Okay, let me know if you can hear me now. Sorry, I guess my AirPods were just messing up, but let me know if you can hear me now.
We can.
Okay. Okay, great. So, okay, great. So if you can hear me now. Sorry, I was speaking the whole time. I didn't know if you could hear me or not, but yeah. Okay, so essentially what I was saying was, and I'll close this and make this full screen. What I was saying was, so this is an example of a selector. So our selector here is an H1. So we want to target the H1 and we want to give it a color of red. So this will be our selector. This will be our properties, and this will be the value we want to give it. Now, the properties are predefined in CSS, so there are a lot of properties. You don't have to have all memorized. But then occasionally, if you need to do something, you can just look it up. But examples of some we have is color and font size. Another example is if I wanted to style my paragraph, I would give it a P. So this is targeting my paragraph, and I want to give it a color black. So this is a way you would actually write the rule we looked at. So this is the selector, this is the property, and this is the value we want to give. Any questions? Okay, so I guess we can move on. Sorry about the little challenge. Yeah. So the one thing that you always have to remember is that CSS is cascading style sheet. So essentially what that means is that CSS is read from top to bottom. So it means that something that comes at the bottom can override something that comes at the top. And this is one example. So if I had two paragraphs and then I had given one red, and down in my CSS I select the same paragraph and I give it a color blue, my element is actually going to be it's going to end up being styled blue because then CSS cascades. So initially it will be red, but then as my browser is reading it, it sees another blue. So the final color that my paragraph will have is blue. So that is one thing that you always have to have in mind, that CSS cascade. So it means it is read from top to bottom. So something at the bottom can override something at the top. It's something that usually worries developers because sometimes you think you've written something and then you're wondering why it's not working. But then usually you've probably given it another styling at the bottom that is conflicting. Okay, so before we move on, any questions? And we'll actually try and start writing some CSS, but any questions? If anyone has any questions, please feel free to ask whilst I open up my VS Code. And also, by the way, were we all able to download the class materials ahead of time? Do we all have that readily available? Let me see a thumbs up if you have the class materials. If not, we'll give it a few minutes so that everybody can get it. So that today we can code along so that it won't just be you watching me. So, okay, Kevin has it. Kobna, do you have it? Kenny, George, do you all have were you all able to download the class materials ahead of time? Okay, great. Great. Since we all have it, I'll just go ahead and share my VS Code. Okay. Please let me know if you can see my VS Code. Okay. Okay. Someone PM me, yes. Okay. So the first thing we said was that in our head, that is where we link our CSS. So I'll just I already have a style.css created. So what I'm going to do is in my head, I'm going to do a link and I'm going to link my CSS. So all that this line means is that I'm linking a style sheet. So this is a relative document. So I'm saying that it's a style sheet. And like we said, href is essentially where the resource is located. So this means that in my same folder, there's a folder called style.css. So that's how you link your style sheet. You have it in the head, you do a link, and you do a style.css. So if you haven't done it, you can just go ahead and do it. Okay, so all what that means is that now I can actually go into my CSS file and I can start writing some CSS. And I know that when I save, I expect it to show up in my CSS, in my application or my website or whatever. So the first thing we said is, and let me just make some random things here just for demonstration purposes. 10. Then we can do maybe a span 5. So we said that if we wanted to style the H1, I mean, now we are using element selectors. If we wanted to style the H1, all we have to do is come into our CSS. We give it the H1. So this is the selector, and we say we open and close a curly brace. So we have an opening curly brace, and we have a closing curly brace. Now, there are so many properties. You might not know the properties right now, but one is color. So color is essentially what type of color I want my element to be. So let's give this maybe a color of red. The next thing, okay, just so that let's open this in our browser so that we can see what we are doing. So, okay, so now it says that this is a red heading. So we've given our heading a color of red. Now by default, we know that if we had done this, it would have been a black. But using CSS, we're able to change the appearance of our element. So we're saying that we targeted our heading, our H1 in our CSS, and we give it a color of red. So this is our selector. It means we're targeting our H1. We're giving it the color of red. Now we can target our paragraph. And let's say this is a paragraph with the color blue. So in our CSS, we want to target this paragraph. So again, we can come. So again, we target our P for the paragraph elements that we're trying to target. Then we give it the property that we are looking at. So if we go in our browser and we refresh, we expect that our paragraph is blue. Any questions, please? So anyone, how would we make the span the color black? Anyone can feel free to come off mute and answer. How would we make the span? Make me, I guess, let me, make me the color black. I hope it's clear now. But how would we make the span black? Anyone? Hey, can you guys hear me? Am I talking to myself?
I can hear you.
Oh, Lano, you can go ahead. I see you came off mute. Okay, so in our CSS, we'll target our span and we'll make it the color black. Now, there are a few ways you can do colors, but don't stress your head over. Essentially, in CSS, there are different ways that you can give colors. So there's one, which is obviously by typing the name of the color. But then the challenge with that is sometimes you are limited by colors and their names. There's also what we call RGBA, which is essentially red, green, blue, alpha value. So, I mean, which is another way of doing black. And there's also what we call the hex values, which is essentially you always put a hash, then you write the value you're looking for. I mean, you don't have to have this memorized. I know these colors because I've used them over and over. But those are different ways you can do colors. Most times you would use like an RGBA or a hex value rather than just type in the name, because with the names, you're usually very limited in as to how many colors you might have. But this is the way you would target the elements and give them a different color. And just so that it's something different, maybe let's give it like a pink, because the default is already black, so we won't see the difference. So if we refresh this, we expect to see pink. I mean, it says make me color black, but we made it pink. So far, does this make sense? How we target our elements and we style them? Okay, great. Now the next thing is we said that we sometimes use classes. Now this is I don't know color. Somebody give me a color. I don't know colors. This is a somebody give me any color. Any color.
Blue.
Okay, green. Yes. This is a green paragraph. Now, if we wanted to make this paragraph a different color, because we are targeting all our paragraphs and making the color blue, in our thing, we would see that that paragraph is also blue. In this instance, there are different ways that we can target this particular paragraph and make it the color we want it. One of the obvious ways is to give it a class. So we could give it a class, and we said classes can be anything. So maybe we can call this green. Classes, you just give class names, but usually you want to use something that is meaningful. So when we come into our CSS, now classes, when we want to target classes, we always begin with a period. Now, if we were to refresh this, we will expect that the paragraph that has the class of green should have the color of green. Again, I'll explain just in case it's confusing. So if I refresh this, now this is a green paragraph is green. So by using a class, we've been able to target this paragraph and we've changed the color. So that is one instance where you would use a class. So a class is a way of targeting one particular element if you want to style it differently. Does that make sense, please?
Yes, please.
Also, I would appreciate some feedback just so that I know that if we're understanding or if I need to go over something. So please, I mean, you can either give like a thumbs up or you can come on mute. Okay, Kenny says thumbs up. Okay, great. So by using a class, we're able to target this particular one and make it a different color. So that's one of the uses of a class. I mean, there are instant, you could also use an ID. So for example, if we had a paragraph and we said this is, and by the way, all the colors I know are finished. This is I've done red, gold, green, so I don't know any more colors. This is a yellow paragraph. We could also use an ID if we wanted to. So we could do an ID that we could call it anything. We can call it yellow. I mean, you can even call it banana. Your ID names don't matter as long as you come into your CSS and you're using the same thing. Now, the difference between a class and an ID is that when you want to target an ID, you start with a hash. So a hash banana, and we use an ID name and we call this, we give it a color of yellow. So if we do this, we expect that we have a paragraph with the color of yellow. I hope it's visible. Yes. I mean, I rarely use IDs for my CSS. I mostly stick to classes. The thing to note is that every element can have multiple classes. So I could give this multiple classes, but then you can only have one ID, and ID names, they have to be specific. So if I use banana here, I can't use any ID again, but then I could come here and give this one to a class. I could give this one to a class and call it green. But then I can't use I can't use one ID multiple times. So usually IDs are like for one specific things, but classes can be used across, and you can give every element multiple classes. So I can give this maybe center, and I'm in my mind, what center is that I want to put that in the center. So here I could. Yeah, so what that does is centering the text. So the main thing I want you to know is that every element can have multiple classes, which is doing a different thing. So this is giving it a green color. This is centering it. Any questions? Okay, so the last thing I think we want to talk about is, by the way, please, I hope it makes sense. I hope it makes sense. Is anything confusing? Okay, Kevin says it makes sense. George, Kenny, Kwabna. How about you guys? Okay, great. We're almost at the top of the hour, but we'll go over one more topic before we take a break. Oh, and also just to show you, when I said CSS cascades, let's just show that hopefully it'll, it'll make it make sense. So we said CSS cascades. So let's say I gave this, let's just have multiple paragraphs. So I'll just get rid of the class for now, and I'll get rid of the class. So let's just say that so now we have 3 paragraphs. So let's say at the top, I can get rid of all this. Let's say we give our paragraph a color of red. Then at the bottom of our page, we targeted a paragraph again. We give it a color of blue. What do you think will be the color of our paragraph?
Blue.
Yes, great. Our paragraph will be blue. So if we look in our browser, share, if we refresh, we can see that our paragraphs are blue, even though we give it a paragraph, we give it a color of red at the top, and we give it here. Because CSS is red from top to bottom, initially our paragraph will be blue, but by the time our browser finishes rendering our code, it will just say that, oh, the last thing I see is that the paragraph is supposed to be blue. So then it will give our paragraph a color of blue. So that is what we mean by CSS cascade. So something at the bottom can override something at the top. I hope that makes sense. Okay, great. Now there are different ways. I think I'm sharing my whole screen. There are also different ways by which you can target elements. So that's something that I quickly want us to talk through before we take a break. So you can select elements by relationship. So sometimes if you don't want to give it a class and you want to give it, you can use relationship selectors to still target. So the whole point of selectors is how we are able to target different elements in our HTML and give it a styling. So the first styling is a parent-child element. So it says that if we have a section and we have a paragraph inside and we want to target the paragraph inside a section, we can use the section and we can use the greater than sign and say that B. So all what this means is that in the section, there's a child or there's something that is nested inside and it is a paragraph. I want to target that particular thing and give a color red. If we try it, if we give, let's say, I mean, we don't even have to. So this is our parent element. We can say our parent element is the main. So we can say that in our main, we can use our main element to target it. We can say in our main, there's a paragraph. And in that paragraph, we want to give it the color, I don't know, aquamarine. And we want to increase the font size maybe 10 pixels. So all this is saying is that our main element is the parent thing. It has a child, which is a paragraph. We want to target that paragraph and give it a font size of 10 pixels. So if we look in our browser, we can see that it has targeted our paragraphs and it has given them 10 pixels. 10 pixels is apparently small. So let's make it 100 pixels or yeah, okay, maybe 1,000 pixels. Why not? So if we refresh our page, okay, 1,000 pixels is apparently very big. Okay, maybe that is too big. So yes, we have targeted our paragraphs by using the parent selector. So we are saying that in our main being the parent, our main has a child, which is a paragraph. We want to target that and make it. So that is one way you can target elements. You can use the parent child selector. And the way you do that is by using the greater than sign. I hope that makes sense. Now there's another way you can obviously do this, and it is you can also use okay, we just spoke about the parent child. Okay, we just spoke about the parent child. Now, this should say siblings. Or it's also another way you can do it. You can do parent child. So the difference between this selector using the angle brackets is that it's saying that there's a direct child that comes after it. So let me show you an example. If in our code we didn't have a paragraph, let's say Control X section. Then I show this and I refresh. The reason this didn't change is that it is not a direct child. So what this means is that in our main, there's a direct child. So it's a direct child of the main. It is a paragraph. So make that the color aquamarine and make the font size. If we want to find it anywhere in the parent, so it is not a direct child, maybe it is a grandchild, maybe it is your sister's child, what we do is that we take off the greater than sign. Now when we refresh, we get the styling. So the difference is that when we use the greater than sign, we're saying that the element we're trying to style is a direct child of whatever we are using as our selector. So in this instance, when we had this main, we are saying that the paragraph is a direct child. So it means if we look in the paragraph, it is not somebody else's child, it's the direct child. And the way you look at direct childs is the H1 is a direct child, this section is a direct child, this span is a direct child. This paragraph is a child of this section. So it means in turn, it is the main is an ancestor. It's just long family lineage and it can be confusing. But then the only thing to note is that when it comes directly in it, it is a child. But then when it comes and it is nested in something else, it is a grandchild. So this paragraph is a grandchild of the main element, but then it is a child of the section. So if we want to target the direct child, we use the greater than sign. But if we don't care where it is, as long as it can be a child, it can be a grandchild, we just leave a space. So the only difference is that there's a space. And when we refresh, we should see the change affected. I hope that makes sense. Now, the other thing is, so we've looked at the direct ancestor, the direct descendant, and we've looked at the direct child. Now, the last thing we'll look at is siblings. So there's a way we can target elements by their relationship, which is siblings. So in our code, I could do, and if this becomes plenty, I mean, in terms of the relationship selectors, you don't always have to use it. You can just use the elements or the class selectors and you should be fine. But sometimes it's good to understand how these things are working. So essentially, if we wanted to target a direct sibling, what we are saying here is that there's a paragraph. We want to target this paragraph. The way we know the paragraph we want to target is that right before it, it has one next to it, which is also a paragraph. So it is a sibling of a paragraph. So if we look here, this paragraph is, and this paragraph. So this paragraph, line 12 is a sibling of 11. And line 13 is a sibling of this. So if we were to style it like that, we would expect that line 12 and 13 will have different colors. Yes. So as we can see that line 12 and line 13 have different colors. So essentially, all the sibling selectors is saying is that if I have an element here and I put the plus, I'm saying that the way I know which one I want to target is that I have this element, but the one I want to style is this one, which is directly next to this one. So it could be anything. It doesn't have to be a paragraph. So what this line is saying is that I want to start the H2, which is a direct sibling of the H1. So in this one, we can see that this H2 is a direct sibling of this H1. So if we were to refresh, we would expect that this H2 will pick up the styling that we have here. And I think 100 pixels is too big. So let's make it 16. So if I refresh, I can see that the H2 has a different color because then it is the direct sibling of this. Any questions before we take a break? So, I mean, the main ways you will usually be styling is, or at least the one I use mostly is, if I can quickly go back. The one I use mostly is I use the elements and I use the class selectors. I never have to use ID selectors. I rarely use ID selectors. But then there are sometimes occasionally when you're trying to target a particular thing and you don't want to necessarily give it like a class, because then you don't want to give it a class. So then you use like the relationship selector. So you just find who is the sibling, who is the direct parent, and you just target that and you style it. So any questions on types of selectors before we take a break? And then when we come back, we'll look at how to do more styling. We'll look at backgrounds, we'll look at positioning stuff. But any questions so far? Any questions whilst we prepare to take the break? Okay, so we'll take a 5 minutes break and then I'll see you guys after the break. Yeah. And please stretch. Don't sit down and try to code. Stretch, walk around. If things are not making sense, leave your computer for a bit. I'll see you in 5 minutes. I'll share the timer. Okay, welcome back, everyone. Uh, okay. So we just in the last half of the class, we want to talk about some CSS examples of CSS properties. I mean, so far we have seen a few from the examples we've been writing, but we just want to take a look at some. So one obvious one that we've been using is the color property. So color property allows you to give a different color, or it allows you to give a color to your element. I mean, there are so many colors you can use. So if you want to change your text color, you use the color property. Another example is font size. So if you want to change the size of something, you change it using the font size property. Now there are different measuring units, I guess, that you can use. So you have pixels, you have rems, and you have ems. But I guess what most of us are used to is pixels. So you can do like 16 pixels, 10 pixels. Eventually, as we'll learn why pixels are not always the best to use and why we rather use ems and rems. But for now, just know that the way you change your font size is by using the font size property. There are so many properties that you don't have to have all memorized. I mean, you can always go to the MDN, as we always recommend. Go to the MDN if you need a property. The one, I guess one last one I have here is text align. So text align is essentially how you want your text to where you want where you want your text to begin from. So we have like the left, the right, center. So those are some of the values it takes. So those are some examples of CSS properties. And again, you can always go to the MDN for more. Okay, so in the last half, today we'll closely. Again, I'm still stuck in a weird place, but yeah, for the rest of our class, we'll try and code. In the starter materials, I have some beginner code that we'll try and complete together. So I mean, if you have it, you can open it up. So in the class folder, there's one folder called basic CSS. So essentially, I have some tasks there that I'd like us to complete together. I mean, I'll put maybe 10 minutes on the timer whilst everyone tries to work on it. I mean, like we've said, the best way to learn how to code is to actually write code. It's not to watch me code because I know how to code. So watching me code will make you a better coder. So just so that we get some hands-on practice, I put a little exercise there that we'll do together. So we'll just go over it. I've already linked the CSS. So like I said, you always link your CSS in the head and you link it as a style sheet. So we say it's a style sheet. Then the href is essentially where you can find that file. So here, by saying that there's a CSS folder in it, there's a style.css. So what I would like you to do is, I mean, we've not spoken about backgrounds and stuff, but the one thing about being a developer is you always have to find stuff. You always have to research. So I put 10 minutes on the clock and I want you to try and do this. So, I mean, I have what I want you to do. So make this text blue, underlined and have a gold background. Make this text purple. So just follow the instructions and try and complete it. And after 10 minutes, we'll come and do it together. So I'll put 10 minutes on the clock. How are we feeling about it? Are we excited? Thumbs up if you have any questions before we begin. Okay, so 10 minutes. Try your possible best. I mean, it's fine if you don't get everything, but then give it a good try. Try and complete it. Then after the 10 minutes, we'll come and we'll do it together. So hands on keys, everyone. Also, if you don't have it, I'll just share my screen and the timer so that you can try and replicate it in your own ID or if you're using VS Code. So I'll just try and split my screen so that you can look on it and complete it. Is anyone done yet? Or should we wait the full 5 minutes? Is anyone done? Okay, we have one person done. Anyone else done? Okay, I guess we can wait out the 1 minute, then we'll do it together. Okay, so let's quickly go over this. So as usual, I was like, if you needed anything, you're free to use the MDN for reference. And as engineers and stuff, most times there'll be things that you don't know and you would have to use Google or use the MDN. So by the way, I hope everyone can hear me.
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you, George. So the first one was to make this text blue. So like we said, and let me just close out, let me close out the previous ones just so that they don't conflict. So in this is the file we're working with. So the first one was to make it blue. And like we said, we can just use the element. I mean, you could give a class and do like maybe heading and target it. But I guess in this instance, it's not a very complicated project, so we can just target the element. So we'll just target the H1. We'll target the H1 and I know we hadn't spoken about underline, but did anybody figure out how to do underline? You can just type in chat. Okay, so there's a property called text decoration. So that's the way you do underline. And again, like I'm saying, you don't have to have all these memorized. The more you use it, the more you get familiar with it. So we said make this text blue, underlined, and have a gold background. So conveniently, we have a CSS property called background. So and as always, when you make changes, you save it, because if you don't save it, it won't reflect. So if we were to open this in our browser, and if I share my browser, okay, so we have a beautiful blue text, which is underlined and has a gold background. Great. Now, This one said, make this text purple, bolded, 25 pixels, and have an orange background. Let me copy this so that I don't have to keep coming back because I won't remember. So let me just paste it here. And also, if you want to make comments, if you want to make comments, you do a control and forward slash so that this becomes a comment so that it doesn't show an error. So that's how you make comments in CSS. You do a control forward slash or a command forward slash. Forward slash is the one that has the question mark on top of it. Yeah. So it says we should make our A2. Again, you could give it a class, but I guess this is a very simple project, so we can just use the element selectors. I mean, if we had so many A2s, that would become a problem. Then we could give all of them individual classes. But for this, we only have one A2, so I guess it's fine. We can just use the element to target. It says we should make this text purple, so we'll give it a text purple. It says we should make it bolder, so font size bold. Then it says we should give it oh, sorry, it says we should give it a font size of 25 pixels. So font weight is how you make things bold. Again, you don't have to have all this memorized. The only reason I know this is because I've used it over and over. But then, I mean, if you were trying to make something bold and you didn't know how to do it, as always, you go to the MD and how do I make something bold? So it says we should make this the color purple. We should give it a font size of 25 pixels, background of orange, and font weight bold. So if we go into our browser and we refresh, there we go. We have a beautiful header with a purple background and 25 pixels. Great. Let's do the rest, then we'll wrap up. So, and I can just get rid of this comment. Now it says that we should make our section a width of 25, a width of 50%, height of 200 pixels, a background of gray, border of black, and that we should make the paragraph text white. Okay, so the first thing it says we should do is we should make our section. Again, we can just target our section like this. If we had so many sections that we wanted to make it different, I guess we can use a class and maybe call it, we can call it anything. We can call it maybe another section. I mean, again, classes can be any name, but I'm using a class for this one just so that, I mean, when you go back to look at the video or something, it makes sense. So we said if we are using a class selector, we always begin with a period or a dot, then the class name. So here it will be dot another section. Then we said we want to give it a width of 50%. So width is how wide it is. And in CSS, there's conveniently something called width, and we can do percentages to us. So we give it a width of 50%, height of 200 pixels, and a background of gray. So we can give it a height of 200 pixels. Again, just to remember, the variable names are always small letters. We can, again, just to remember the property names are all small letters. That's something I always have to have in mind. They are all small letters. So always remember that it's small letters. Don't do capital letters. So this says that we should give our section a border of black, then we should make our paragraph text white. So we do a border of black. Now, there are different ways you could target this paragraph. So, for example, I mean, in this instance, there's just one paragraph. So I guess you could just use the the element selector, you could just do a paragraph. But I mean, if you had like multiple paragraphs, you could give this a class. You could also use the relationship selector. So I'll use the relationship selector here just so that you have something to reference. So you could do another section. And this paragraph is a direct child of the section. So we can do paragraph direct child. So we're saying that we want to style the paragraph, which is the direct child of the section, and we want to make the text, and we want to make the color of the text white. So if we save this and we look in our browser, we should see a beautiful section. Did I save? Okay, I didn't save my HTML. As always, don't forget to save. So we have another section. Okay, great. Okay, great. So we have a beautiful section with a paragraph which is white, and we have, I mean, our border is now so visible. So another thing you could do with borders is you can give it like a border, the width of the border. So border maybe 3 pixels solid black. Again, you don't have to have all these memorized. You can always go to the MDN, and the more you use it, the more you would remember. So now we can see our border, we can see our section. We've given our section a width. So what happens when you give something a width is, so you can say from the left to the right is 100% width. But if we're given a 50% width, we are saying that's half of the page. So you can give things width. You can give it a height too. So I mean, from the top to the down of your page will be 100%, but you can give it like a specific height. And the last thing we had to do here was, it says that we should make this footer a black background with light green border and this text. And just so that I don't forget, let me paste everything here so that I can look on it once I do it. Okay, let me hide this. Okay, so it says that we should make our footer. Sorry, I don't think I'm sharing my VS Code. So it says we should make our footer. Again, this is a very simple project, so we can just use the elements name to just target it. But then I guess when you have projects where you have like multiple H1s, you have multiple sections, then you're leaning more towards like giving them individual classes so that you can separate them. Because I mean, if you have 5 sections and you just target section, it will just style all the sections with the properties you give it. But if you want your sections to look a different way, then you have to find a way to differentiate it. So you use your classes and things. But for this, we only have one of each. So it makes sense to use just the name. So I mean, we can just target our footer. It says that we should give our footer a black background. So we just do a background, black. It says we should give it a border of light green. And it says that we should give it a Roboto font. Sorry, this floating thing keeps getting in my way. Hi. And we should give it a Roboto font. Okay, first, before we do the font family, because it's something that you've not done before, but it says that I should have a 20 pixels, so font size 20 pixels. Now, there are different ways you can do a font. So your CSS or your editor usually comes with fonts that you can use. So for example, if I do a font family, you can see there are some fonts that I already have. But there are times when you want to use a font that doesn't necessarily come with your ID or something. So Google, thankfully, Google has Google Font. So this is the way you do it. And let me share my screen and show you. So in this project, it tells us to use Roboto. So what you can do is you can go to Google Font, Google Font. Now, when you go to Google Font, Google has so many fonts that you can use. So if you want to use a particular font that you don't have, you go on Google Fonts and you can usually search it. So here we're looking for Roboto. So Google pops up with Roboto. Then we can select the one we want. So I mean, for now, let's just say we want like a regular. Now, when you select it, you can see here, Google gives you two things. It gives you a link. So usually what you just do is you just copy it. You copy the link it gives you. Then in your code, you put it in the head because it's a link. So you put all the links in your head. So if I save this, this is just all the fonts Google has given me. So now if I come back in my code and I do a font family, if I can spell Roboto, Roboto, and usually you give it like we give it like a fall-on font. So not all browsers are able to have the fonts that you're looking for. So you always give it like a follow-on font that if you don't find this font, use this font, just so that you don't have a blank page. So because this is me importing the fonts from Google. So now I can use the Roboto. And when I refresh my page, I should see, one sec. Let me clear this. If I refresh my page, I should see a beautiful footer with our Roboto font. Okay, it says that we should make our text white. So let me just quickly make the text white. And it's not easy switching between screens, so pardon me. So now we should see a beautiful footer with black background and white text. I mean, I hope we were all able to do it, but if you weren't able to do it, I'll share this code after class and you can look on it. Now, the one thing to note is that most times you would have a designer who will give you a design, then you try and replicate it. So you don't have to know how to design. Like I'm personally very bad at like selecting like what fonts, even for my personal project. Like I never know what colors to use. I never know what fonts to use. So usually you have a designer for most when you're working in a company or in a team, you usually have people whose responsibility is to like design stuff. So then you just come and you code out the colors. So I mean, most people don't like CSS because I mean they feel like you have to be very creative to be able to code and use the CSS, use CSS, but you don't have to because usually you have like people who would design for you and you just have to replicate that in code. So don't let, if you don't know colors like me or if you don't know what font to use, I mean, we're in the same boat. So you don't have to worry about that. You don't have to be super creative to be able to do CSS. But I mean, essentially today what we've covered is how to use CSS to make our pages look nice. Because when we're just using HTML, it was just blank text, white white background, black text, and most websites don't look like that. So just to review the things that we've covered today. So today we've spoken about style sheets. We've gotten our first exposure to what CSS is and how we can use it. We've spoken about how to link our CSS. We said we put the link in our head to the file, our CSS file. Then we write all our CSS in the CSS file. That way the CSS will reflect in our HTML. So we link it in our head. We use the relative style sheet and we link it to the name of our folder. So the normal convention is to name your CSS style.css. I mean, sometimes you have multiple CSS files for different features, so you name it according to the feature, but most times the usual convention is to call it style.css. We've also looked at the syntax for CSS. We said first you have the selector, you have the property name, and you have the value. We said the property is defined in the CSS spec, so it's not something that we are creating ourselves. So we've looked at some examples. We've looked at font size, we've looked at colors, we've looked at backgrounds, we've looked at text decoration, which allows us to either underline things and stuff like that. And again, you don't have to have all memorized. It's something that you can always look up. And the more you use it, the more you know these properties of head. We've also looked at selectors. We looked at element selectors, so how we can use the name of the element to target it and style it. We've also looked at class selectors, where we can use classes to style stuff, and we briefly looked at ID selectors too. We've written a lot of code, so we know how to style things. You have the selector, you have the property, and you have the value that you want to give it. Yeah, we also said that CSS cascades down. So what it means is that it's read from top to bottom. So it means that something at the bottom can affect what is at the top. So if I have two paragraphs and they are all blue, and one is red and one is blue, if I don't differentiate it, the one at the bottom will overwrite the one at the top because CSS cascades. So sometimes the way we can overcome that is if we have two different paragraphs, for example, and want to give them different colors, we can use relationship selectors, or we can give them different classes so that one doesn't overwrite the other one. I mean, we've looked at relationship selectors, we looked at parent-child. We said if it is a direct child, we use the greater than sign. If it is just a child, we don't mind if it is a direct child. If it is nested deep within, we can just use a space. And we've looked at sibling selectors. So if we want to target something that is directly next to something, so it's a sibling, we use the plus. Yeah. And I mean, we've looked at some properties too. So we've seen colors, we've seen font sizes, we've seen backgrounds. We've seen quite a few properties today. So just to wrap up, I mean, this was assigned last week, but then if you haven't, you should still get to read Shea House, Getting to Know CSS, and read chapter 3 and chapter 4. Our next class, we'll learn how to position stuff, because I mean, currently all that we are doing is in a straight format, but then sometimes we want to position things on the left. So if we have a picture I want to put on the left, I want things to be on the right, stuff like that. So I mean, learn layout as like a great introductory on positioning and stuff. So I'd recommend that you read that. I would have a homework in the homework materials. It'll be on the Google Drive. It'll just be a simple layout for us to do. It'll mostly incorporate the things that we have learned. So the HTML, last week we looked at forms, we looked at inputs, and today we've looked at styling background. So it'll just incorporate the two. And as always, homework is due 1 week after it has been assigned. If you haven't had a chance to, you can also submit the previous homeworks. The link is in the email. So yes, any questions before we wrap up and we run away? Okay, so I guess no questions. So thank you. I mean, today a few people messaged me that they had network challenges. Someone said their lights were off. So hopefully they'll try and catch up on the recording. So, I mean, thank you all for joining. I hope you had a good time learning some CSS and learning how to make your pages look a little nicer. Next week, we'll learn how to make them even more nicer so that they can look like the real websites that we're able to visit on the internet and stuff like that. So thank you all for joining. Have a wonderful evening, and I'll see you all on Saturday. Bye, everyone.